There are men the world thinks it knows. Men whose faces have filled 1,000 screens, whose voices have rattled cinema walls and made strangers feel safe in the dark. You have seen him. You know the jaw, the height, the eyes that carry something ancient and unresolved. You have watched him play heroes, killers, fathers, and ghosts. And somewhere in the comfortable certainty of all that familiarity, you made the same mistake everyone makes. You thought you knew him. But what if the most important story about Liam Neeson was never the one on the screen? What if behind every commanding performance, behind every stoic public appearance, behind every carefully chosen word in every careful interview, there was a grief so total, so bone-deep, that it rewired the man entirely? What if the strength you admired was never confidence at all, but survival wearing a very convincing mask? And here is the question that will stay with you long after this video ends. When a man loses the one person who made the whole world make sense, who does he become? And more quietly, more painfully, what does he do with all the love that is nowhere left to go? Stay with this, because what you are about to hear is not a Hollywood story. It is a human one. And those are always the ones that cut deepest. Ballymena is not a place that forgives softness. Tucked into the northeastern edge of Northern Ireland, it is a town built from grey stone and Protestant work ethic, where the wind comes off the hills without apology and the people are shaped by the same stubbornness as the land itself. In June of 1952, into this town, into a small terraced house on a road that asked nothing of you except endurance, Liam John Neeson was born. The second child and only son of Bernard Neeson, a school caretaker, and Catherine Brown, a cook. Simple people, decent people, people who measured love not in words, but in the constancy of their presence. His father, Bernard, was a quiet man, not cold, just economical with emotion in the way that generation of working-class Irish men tended to be. He worked hard and came home. He provided without complaint. There was dignity in that. Young Liam watched it and absorbed it in the way children absorb everything. Not consciously, but completely. The lesson being taught without a single word spoken. A man holds it together. A man keeps moving. A man does not let you see him flinch. His mother, Kitty, was the warmth in the house. She cooked and she sang and she had a laugh that belonged to her alone. The kind of laugh that makes a room feel smaller and safer all at once. Liam was clearly hers. Her boy in the way that only sons can be their mother's boys. He was tall early, awkward in that height, the way boys are when their bodies outgrow their confidence. He played Gaelic football and was decent enough at it. He was altar boy at the local church, St. Patrick's, and there, in the candlelit quiet of that stone building, surrounded by incense and Latin and the particular hush of something sacred, something settled in him. He was Catholic in the way Northern Irish Catholics are Catholic, not casually, but structurally. Faith was not a weekend decision. It was the architecture of the self. But Ballymena was also a town divided. The troubles were not abstract politics in this part of the world. They were the texture of daily life. Sectarian lines ran through neighborhoods the way fault lines run through rock, invisible until the earth moved, and then suddenly, terrifyingly clear. Liam was Catholic in a predominantly Protestant town. He learned early what it meant to exist on the uncomfortable side of a line someone else had drawn. He learned what it felt like to be looked at with suspicion you had not earned. That feeling would never entirely leave him. He was 17 when he got into boxing. There was something about it that suited the particular shape of his restlessness, the discipline of it, the loneliness of it, the way it gave you somewhere to put things that had no other place to go. He was good. Not great, but good enough that it mattered. He fought at welterweight and found in the gym a kind of honesty that the outside world rarely offered. In a boxing ring, nothing is pretend. You are exactly as strong or as weak as you actually are. For a boy still figuring out who he was underneath all that height and quiet, that honesty was a gift. He worked in a forklift factory. He drove trucks. He was a schoolteacher briefly, and reportedly terrible at it, which is the kind of detail that makes him instantly more real and more likable. He was searching, not dramatically, not with any visible anguish, but searching the way all sensitive people search when they have not yet found the container that can hold everything they are. Then, almost accidentally, he found the stage. The Lyric Theatre in Belfast. A cramped, passionate, underfunded little institution where people who cared far too much about theater gathered to make art in a city that was coming apart at its seams. Liam walked in, and something shifted. Not immediately. Nothing real ever happens immediately. But incrementally, performance began to feel like the first language he had ever actually spoken fluently. He could be large on stage in a way that real life had never quite allowed. He could feel things and have them witnessed without it being weakness. That was the revelation. That was the thing that changed everything. But before any of that could become a life, before the stages of London or the screens of Hollywood, before any of the glory that was coming, there was a loss that arrived early, landed hard, and left a mark that no amount of success would ever fully cover. In 1978, when Liam was 26 years old and still trying to piece together what kind of man he was going to be, he received the news that his girlfriend, a young woman he had loved with the particular intensity of that age, had died. The details are ones he has rarely shared fully and fully deserves to keep to himself. But the fact of it, the sudden, senseless, too young ending of someone he loved, this was the wound. This was the moment the world stopped feeling safe in the specific way it had felt safe before. Grief at 26 is a strange and particular animal. You are old enough to understand what you have lost and still young enough to believe, somewhere beneath the devastation, that this cannot be permanent, that the pain will pass the way pain is supposed to pass. But some losses do not pass. Some losses change the actual shape of you, quietly, permanently, in ways you will not fully understand for years. He carried this. He kept moving because that was what he knew how to do. But he carried it. And here is a detail that will return to you later in this story, that will mean something different the second and third time you encounter it. Liam Neeson has spoken about how, in the aftermath of loss, he finds himself looking at the sky. Not metaphorically, literally, standing outside and tilting his face upward as if the sky might offer some answer that the earth cannot. It is a small and deeply human gesture. Remember it. By the early 1980s, Liam had made his way to London and then to New York, chasing something that felt increasingly like destiny and increasingly like madness in equal measure. He was broke in the way that actors are broke, not starving, but permanently uncertain, living in the hollow spaces between auditions and odd jobs, and the occasional small role that kept the hope alive without actually solving anything. He was 30 years old, 31, 32, in an industry that worshipped youth. He was watching younger men get the roles he wanted. He was tall and Irish and categorically difficult to cast in the Hollywood of that era. Too big for romantic leads, too sensitive for pure action, too something for the people who wrote the checks to feel comfortable betting on him. He could feel it. That particular helplessness of watching your own potential go unrecognized by people who held all the power. There were moments, and he has hinted at these without ever fully articulating them, when the whole project of Liam Neeson as a serious actor seemed not just unlikely but actively delusional. When the gap between who he knew himself to be and who the world was willing to see felt so vast that bridging it seemed impossible. Those are the moments that break people. Those are the exits that talented individuals take when the road becomes too long and the validation too scarce. He did not take the exit, but standing at it, looking down, that is where we find him. Right here, at the edge, before everything changed. And here is the thing about people who stay when they should have left. When they finally get their moment, it doesn't feel like luck. It feels like recognition. Like the world finally catching up with something that was always true. The moment arrived in the form of a phone call from Steven Spielberg. 1993. Schindler's List. The role of Oskar Schindler, a deeply complicated, morally imperfect, ultimately transcendent human being who saved over 1,000 Jewish lives during the Holocaust, not out of pure heroism, but out of some mixture of greed and guilt and love that even he probably could not fully explain. It was the role of a lifetime. It was also the most demanding thing any actor could be asked to carry. Spielberg had looked at a long list of names. He had considered men who were already stars, men whose casting would have made the financial decisions easier. And he chose Liam Neeson, a tall Irishman from Ballymena who had spent 15 years being almost famous. The vote of confidence was staggering. The weight of it was equally so. The production filmed in Krakow, Poland, in the actual streets, in the actual cold, in the gray and devastating reality of the places where these events had actually happened. There was no escaping what the film was about. There was no distance between the story and its setting. Every day on set was an immersion in one of the darkest chapters of human history, and Liam Neeson had to walk through it as a man who chose, imperfectly, to be better than the world around him was demanding he be. What he gave in that film is not acting in the way you usually discuss acting. It is something closer to transmission. There is a scene near the end, the famous list scene, where Schindler, adorned in his Nazi pin, realizes he could have sold his car and saved 2 more people, could have sold his pin and saved 1 more, and he collapses. He weeps. Not the pretty movie weeping of a man performing grief, but the ugly, gasping, inconsolable weeping of someone who understands too late the precise weight of the choices they made. Watch Liam Neeson's face in that scene. Watch what he does with the silence before the breakdown. That is not performance. That is something that was already inside him, waiting for the right container. Schindler's List won 7 Academy Awards. Liam Neeson was nominated for Best Actor. He did not win, which, in the fullness of time, feels almost beside the point. What he won was something the Oscar cannot give you. He won the world finally seeing what he had always been. And then the world gave him everything. Roles came quickly after that. Michael Collins, Les Miserables, Star Wars, and eventually the action franchise films that would make him a different kind of icon entirely. Taken, released in 2008, when he was 56 years old, redefined what an action star could look like. Suddenly, here was this tall, weathered, unmistakably human man doing things that 25-year-olds usually did on screen. Audiences loved it not in spite of his age, but because of it. Because there was something in his face that the young men's faces did not have. Because he looked like someone who had actually suffered and actually survived. Because the weariness was real. He became, in that strange and specific way that movie stardom works, beloved. Genuinely beloved. The kind of famous where strangers feel a personal warmth toward you that has nothing to do with knowing you at all. And underneath all of it, love. Her name was Natasha Richardson. She was British, the daughter of Vanessa Redgrave, born into theater royalty and carrying that inheritance with grace and steel in equal measure. She was brilliant. She was warm. She was, by every account of everyone who ever knew her, the kind of person who made every room more alive simply by being in it. They met in 1993 while performing in a Broadway revival of Anna Christie. They fell in love the way people fall in love when both of them are already real, not in the dazzled, incomplete way of early youth, but with the full weight of knowing who you were and choosing each other anyway. They married in 1994. They had 2 sons, Michael and Daniel. They made a home. They made a life that looked, from every angle that mattered, like the answer to a question Liam had been carrying since that loss at 26. Like proof that the sky he had been looking at in his grief had not been empty after all. She was the love. She was the specific, irreplaceable love that some people spend their whole lives looking for and many never find. He found her. He had her. For 15 years, she was the ground beneath him. On February 18, 2009, Natasha Richardson went skiing on a beginner slope at the Mont Tremblant ski resort in Quebec, Canada. She fell. The fall looked minor. She stood up, declined medical assistance, seemed fine. An hour later, she complained of a headache. She was taken to the hospital. She had suffered a traumatic brain injury, a blunt epidural hematoma. 2 days later, on March 18, 2009, with her husband by her side, Natasha Richardson died. She was 45 years old. He was 56. There are losses that you prepare for, losses that come after long illness, losses that give you the mercy of anticipation. And then there is this, a Tuesday, a beginner ski slope, a fall that looked like nothing, and then the absolute silence of a world without the person who made it make sense. Liam Neeson has spoken about the immediate aftermath only in fragments. About walking the streets of New York at 3 in the morning because he could not be still. About the grief that did not feel like sadness but like amputation. Not the presence of pain but the presence of absence, vast and incomprehensible. About friends who showed up and simply sat with him, which was all anyone could do. About his sons, Michael and Daniel, who were 13 and 12 years old, and who needed their father to still be present even as the ground had disappeared beneath him. About looking up at the sky. He threw himself into work. This is what Neeson men do. This is the inheritance from Bernard, from Bellimina, from the Grey Hills, and the Protestant work ethic soaked into a Catholic boy. You keep moving. You do not stop. Stopping is when it catches you. And so the films kept coming. The Taken sequels, Unknown, Non-Stop, The Grey. And in The Grey, in particular, there is something raw and barely disguised. The film follows a man stranded in the Alaskan wilderness, hunted by wolves, stripped of every comfort and protection until he is left with the single, most basic human question. When everything is gone, what do you hold on to? In the film's most devastating scene, he pulls from his wallet a photograph of his late wife. He holds it in the snow and he speaks to her, asks her for help, asks her to help him keep going. Watch Liam Neeson film that scene. Watch what is in his eyes. That is not a man acting. In 2019, Liam Neeson gave an interview that shocked the world and nearly ended his career. He described how, decades earlier, after a close friend had told him she had been raped by a black man, he had gone out into the streets with Akash, hoping to find a black man, any black man, to take violent revenge upon. He described it with horror, with shame, as an example of how grief and rage can twist a person into something they do not recognize and do not want to be. He said it as a confession, as a cautionary tale, as an act of brutal self-examination. The world did not receive it that way. The backlash was immediate and volcanic. Premieres were canceled. The moral calculus of his legacy was suddenly in question. He stood in the center of that storm and did not run from what he had said. He stood in it and said, yes, this was real, and yes, it was wrong. And here is what I have learned about what hate does to a person when they let grief turn poisonous. He was not making excuses. He was doing the thing that almost no public figure does anymore, accounting. Whether you believe his reckoning was sufficient is a conversation that belongs to each viewer. But what is undeniable is that the revelation came from a man trying to understand his own darkness and trying to warn others about what rage, unexamined, can produce in the human heart. He came back, not immediately, not easily, but he came back, to work, to life, to public presence. And there is something worth seeing in the particular quality of his public self in the years after all of it. The losses, the grief, the scandal, the reckoning. He is not smaller. He is not guarded in the defensive, shuttered way of men who have been burned. He is something quieter and more interesting than that. He is present. In interviews from the past several years, there is a quality to him that is hard to name exactly. A willingness to sit with difficult questions without deflecting. A refusal to perform a happiness he does not feel. An honesty about solitude. He has said that he still feels the absence of Natasha every day, that the grief does not end. It only changes shape. He has said that his faith has been tested and stretched and has, in the end, held. Not because faith makes loss painless, but because faith insists that love means something permanent, that the people we lose are not simply gone. His sons have grown into men. Michael became an actor. Daniel works in film production. They carry their mother's face and their father's seriousness and the particular gravity that comes from having loss woven into you early. Liam has spoken about them with a quiet ferocity of love that is almost too much to look at directly. Everything he does now, he has said, he does for them. The films, the work, the keeping going. For them. And for her. He has walked those New York streets at 3 in the morning, has looked up at the sky above the buildings, and has found, if not answers, then at least the steadiness of something vast and patient and indifferent to the smallness of human suffering in the best possible sense. In the sense that the sky was there before the pain and will be there after, and that is, perhaps, its own strange comfort. At 73, Liam Neeson is still working, still tall, still weathered, still carrying in his face the accumulated weight of everything he has lived. He does not look like a man who has made peace with his grief. He looks like a man who has learned to carry it without letting it crush him. That is a different thing. That is a harder and more honest thing. His legacy is not simple. It is not the tidy narrative of a man who suffered and overcame and emerged transformed and healed. It is the messy, realer story of a man who kept going through things that by any reasonable measure should have stopped him, who loved enormously and lost catastrophically and chose, in the aftermath, not to close, who made mistakes that revealed the darkest parts of what grief can do to a person and then turned and faced those mistakes with his eyes open, who stands in the snow and speaks to photographs, who looks up at the sky. Now here is where this story becomes yours. You have watched this. You have sat with this man's life for a few minutes and felt, probably, something you did not entirely expect to feel. Because that is what happens when you stop treating a famous person as a symbol and start seeing them as a person. Something in the chest shifts. Something softens. And if you are honest, if you are really honest, some part of what moved you in his story moved you, because it is your story too. The loss you carry that you do not fully speak. The grief that changed the actual shape of you. The face you look for in crowded rooms that is no longer there to be found. The sky you have tilted your face toward on mornings when the ground felt unreliable. You have had a Tuesday that looked ordinary until it wasn't. You have had a love that felt like the answer and then felt like the most painful question. You have kept going when keeping going made no sense and felt like the smallest possible act of stubbornness. And you did it anyway, one foot and then the other, because what else is there? What Liam Neeson's story offers is not inspiration in the poster quote sense. It is something more honest than that. It is the simple, difficult fact that a person can be famous and still invisible, can be strong and still breaking, can lose the irreplaceable thing and not be finished, can do something in rage and darkness that reveals their worst self, and then have to go on living in that knowledge and choosing, every day after, to be better. You can hold a photograph in the snow and still keep walking into the wilderness. You can look up at the sky, right now, today, in whatever weather your life is currently moving through, and not require an answer from it. Just the looking. Just the willingness to face something larger than your own pain and let it remind you that you are not the first, and you are not the last, and you are not alone in any of this. Liam Neeson turned 73 and the world watched and thought it knew what it was seeing. An aging action star. A famous face. A man who had made it. But now you know what you are actually seeing. A man who loved a woman who died on a Tuesday on a beginner ski slope, who walked the streets of New York at 3 in the morning in the months after, who looked up and kept looking up, who raised 2 sons in the specific silence that follows catastrophic loss, who made mistakes and owned them, who kept working not because work solved anything, but because it was the only honest thing left to do. That is not a tragedy. Or it is, but it is also something else. Something that does not have a clean word for it. Something you already understand, somewhere below the place where words live. What are you still carrying that you have not let yourself fully look at? And if you tilted your face upward right now, toward whatever sky exists above the ceiling of the room where you are sitting, what would you be willing to ask?